All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name is Pietro. I've got, as I promised last time, enough ranting into oblivion, just me and Floyd or Max. We've got a guest on, and our guest tonight is our longtime friend of the podcast. He is, as of this episode, the most often recurring guest. So welcome back to the show, Mr. Jordan Dittloff. How are you?
Crowd goes wild. Good. I hear that John Ruddock might be overtaking or equaling me soon. We're neck and neck at the moment, but that's a good person to share the podium with, so I don't have any issues with that. Yeah, I'm going well, man. It's been a lot's happened since the last time I was on the podcast with you guys. So yeah, it's been a pretty big whirlwind of a year. And yeah, I'm joining you now as the lead Senate candidate for the Libertarian Party in Victoria.
Oh, well, spoilers. So you've spoiled the John Ruddock thing and you spoiled the introduction as the lead set. Anything else you'd like to spoil? Hopefully,
I'd
the
like I'd
election.
like to spoil the 2025 election in Victoria and come across the line and snake the sixth Senate spot. That's my final ultimate spoiler.
Good. Yes, that's perfect, actually. Keep spoiling. Um, yeah, no, well, look, every time you come on the show, I think I mentioned it last time, you've been wearing a different hat. Like the first time you were talking as your experience with your previous criminal past and redemption story. Then you came and spoke on behalf as the federal secretary of the party. Then the time after that, you came and spoke as I forget. You've probably had a different role. Maybe it was were you vice president at one point?
No, I think the last time might have been just focusing on the ACMA legislation as a bit of a subject matter
Yeah.
specialist, maybe.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like
Yeah.
one of those
Specialist.
like one
Specialist
of
is
those
a good
Monty
word.
Python sketches where the same person keeps popping up behind different desks with different different
Yeah,
info.
wearing a different wig.
Yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
you're wearing a different shirt today. If anyone who's watching, you can see the Libertarian Party polo, some of the new merchandise. Well, that is to signify that you are now the candidate for the Senate seat of the upcoming federal election, which looks like it will be probably mid next year. I think that's almost certain at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, so they've announced that they've got the early budget in March, and then based on the constitutionally prescribed periods and what's in the Electoral Act, it's pretty well certain that it's going to be mid to late May. So it'll be around the same time as it was in the 2022 election. So we can expect lots of sideways rain and Victorian autumn joy. They couldn't make it nice weather, but then again, would any government really want to force Victorians to use some of our precious few months of good weather to do elections? Probably not. Wouldn't be a good strategy. So
Well, they could just not force us to vote. That'd be enough.
yeah,
I
look,
mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. We of course would still vote and we'd encourage anyone that cares about liberty to vote. But yes, we of course would prefer the voting not be at gunpoint. So
Um, well, look, we can't assume that everyone who's watching this episode, hopefully we do have a few viewers since the last time that we spoke. So we can't assume that everyone knows your story. If you are interested in Jordan's story in full, you can go back and I think it was like our second or third episode ever where you told your full story. But do you want to maybe give a brief introduction as to who you are and why you've decided to run for Senate for the Libertarian Party?
but before I do that, I want to set off on the right foot and model myself as I would if I was to be elected as a senator. I want to make a disclosure on the register of interests as a candidate that this brand new microphone, that if anyone's listened to either my previous appearances on this podcast or on other appearances and thought, God, what awful audio! How could someone running for the Senate have such terrible audio? You know it was bad when the podcast itself basically drops a microphone off in the bushes at the front of your house prior to your podcast. So passive aggressive sticky note on fridge equivalent noted. And I hope everyone appreciates the fruit of your efforts and the improved audio quality. But that aside, basically, yeah, as you said, and as we covered in the first podcast when I joined you and Max, my journey to running for the Senate is definitely non-traditional. It's been a winding road, and it's kind of getting to the point that if you read a book that said it was non-fiction that just described 36 years of life so far for me, it would be pretty difficult to believe as non-fiction. And yeah, my story sort of incorporated the the lows of drug and alcohol addiction and criminal offending and failed small business. Victims of my travel agency business owed money, and I did time in prison in my 20s in 2015 through to 2017. And then that was really the rock bottom that I needed to turn my life around and build a solid foundation from. And since then, I'm now 9.5 years in recovery. So I haven't had a drink of alcohol or drugs for 9.5 years. I've completed an undergrad business degree and a postgrad law degree. I've managed a number of businesses and, had so many amazing opportunities to really address things that went wrong when I was younger and really sort of show myself and the world that the things that happened then weren't the sum of who I am, and that I've been able to learn and grow from those mistakes. And I think like what I'm finding on the campaign trail and when I speak to people out in Voterland, I think a lot of people really are responding positively, which I've found in my life during that time anyway. If the world was as the Herald Sun would have you believe, that is a mean and horrible place where people are really judgmental and wouldn't be willing to give people a chance, then life might have been very different. But it's not that way, and Australians aren't that way. And I've been really, really grateful to have so many positive, encouraging experiences. And the common theme that people keep saying is that they want politicians who have had life experience. They want politicians to represent them who have learned and made mistakes, who have had the trial and error and had a bit of skin taken off, had a bit of baggage, and lived a real life, rather than politicians who have never had to work for anything, have never had to make mistakes and grow and learn from them, and have either had everything given to them on a silver platter or just gone through a production line to get to elected office. So I think in the big picture sort of public perception, I think that people are really really supportive and really excited about the prospect of the campaign.
Yeah, well, I think most politicians, if not all politicians, should at some point go to jail. And you've already done that part, so you can skip that part, and the rest of them, maybe we can chuck them in there for being the thugs and criminals that we know them to be.
Yeah, look, they say, and I'm not sure if you've gotten to this point yet with your podcast, they say never read the comments. And but there are a few exceptions to that, and one that made me chuckle that I thought was quite good with my dark sense of humor was someone commented, there was a current affair interview I did not long after being endorsed, and someone put in the comments of I think it was like one of those news.com articles or whatever, someone said, well, look, at least we'll have someone who is honest about their criminality for a change, like it'll be refreshing rather than the politicians who just like pretend they're not. So they're like, at least it'd be good to have an honest criminal in so that kind of made me chuckle. I can't say those things generally, but it was pretty funny when that person posted that. So,
well, we can all chuck it on a cornflute. So vote for an honest crook. Look, I do encourage anyone to have a look at your campaign. You're doing lots of stuff, and we can maybe talk a little bit about it at the end and plug some things. I did want to get into what I was actually hoping to talk about today, because not only are you the Senate candidate, but you are as we said before, a specialist voice and an expert on most topics, especially when it comes to legal stuff that's going on. And something that's been going on recently here in Victoria, and it feels a bit like deja vu. So they're calling it the MAD bill, and MAD stands for misinformation and disinformation. But we actually spoke, what was it, last year? Is it a full year? It hasn't even been a full year, I don't think, since the last time.
it was late last year, but it was almost 12 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and we were talking about the ACMA bill, which was proposed to give further powers to ACMA, who are the Australian Communications and Media Authority, to clamp down on social media and on free speech and all this sort of stuff. And there was misinformation, disinformation listed within the purviews of that bill there. And it feels, it's not even been a year and we are having this fight again. So it feels a little bit like deja vu. What is the MAD bill? What's different about it? Why has it come up again? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so actually, if anyone goes back and watches that podcast we did, I may have jinxed it because I did sort of express the view that hopefully, because this wasn't originally a Labor Party bill, this wasn't originally part of their agenda, it was a Liberal Party Morrison government proposal. I had expressed the hope that given the sort of uproar against it and the wave of public sentiment and submissions, I think there was something like 30,000 submissions made during the consultation period for that bill, that maybe the Labor Party wouldn't be reintroducing it after they withdrew it. That isn't the case. And the fact that they have brought it back despite the real outcry, I suppose, and pushback against it really tells you something, I think, about where the motivations for this legislation are coming from. And I don't think it's being done out of political survival or desire for self-preservation. Let's put it that way. I think there's a broader agenda at play here, and you can see in other jurisdictions like the UK, Canada, and unfortunately those kind of countries, we tend to follow where they go. And at the same time, all around the world, many of these countries that are sort of part of the World Economic Forum and I suppose facing a lot of pressure, maybe the whips are at their backs for this sort of pushback against alternative media and voices that are difficult to control. So I think that's why it's back. It actually is the same bill. It's just that we weren't clever enough to think of MAD as an acronym last time for misinformation and disinformation. One of the members of our party, Trevor Craggs, I'm going to give him a call out. He actually just said it off the cuff to me, and I'm like, that's what I'm calling it from now on. And then I was at the very, like, the day it was reintroduced to the Parliament, I was calling it MAD, and that's taken on. So trendsetters, thank you, Trevor, credit where it's due. But basically it is the same bill, and they have taken on board the feedback from the 2023 bill. They've gone away, they've thought about it, and they've come back and made it worse. And I'm not sure, like, at the time, if you had have said to me in 2023, how could it be worse? I probably would have been at a loss to tell you, but they've managed it. And there's a couple of aspects of the bill. So the first thing they've changed is they realised that.
Sorry, before we go into that, it is the Labor Party that is pushing it now, though. So that is a significant difference to last time.
Well, no. So the last time it was before Parliament, it was still the Labor government proposing it, but they were simply continuing on from something that was in the pipeline from the previous month.
Okay.
So it has in both instances been proposed by the Labor Party, but the first time I think you could sort of write it off as saying it was something that was already in the works, and it's not necessarily something they were super passionate about or willing to take a lot of flack for. That now has been shown not to be the case. And we'll come to the Liberal Party and their response to it after we talk a little bit about the bill. But basically, you might remember from the 2023 draft, one of the most egregious things in it was that it made the government itself exempt from misinformation and disinformation. They, I think, have realised that, in the immortal words of Karl Rove from the US political context, it's bad optics. It's not a good look to basically make yourself immune from misinformation and disinformation, especially with the sort of track record the government's had in the last couple of years and the trust levels being very low. But they've kept a lot of stuff in, and they've also added a lot of really troubling stuff in. So one of the things one of the areas where they've added things in that are worse than the bill was before is in the list of things that are categorized as serious harms. So you might remember that one of the key definitions of what makes something misinformation is not only that it be verifiably untrue, we'll come back to that in a second, but that it be basically causing serious harm or capable of causing serious harm. And the categories of serious harm that they've put in the legislation now include the if you do or say something that is verifiably untrue and brings the financial sector and banking sector into jeopardy, basically. Like, so they're apparently now trying to make it misinformation to say, for instance, that there are problems with printing so much money through the fiat system that it devalues currency. That could potentially be causing serious harm to the banking sector, to suggest that people should withdraw their savings from the bank. and sort of cause a bit of a run on currency, that might well be causing serious harm. To suggest that major players in the big four banks are unethical and abusing market power and essentially not very nice characters, maybe that's causing serious harm to the financial and banking system. To suggest before the GFC that the whole system could completely implode because of risky finance practices, before it happened, who knows? Maybe that's now misinformation and disinformation. So that's a really concerning area. And there's another harm they've brought in, which is basically anti-vilification provisions. So saying that if you cause serious harm to a person or group of people on the basis of characteristics like gender identity, sex, sexual preference, really concerning and often really vague categories, where if you essentially are causing serious harm to those groups through information, serious harm, then that could potentially trigger the provisions of the bill. So yeah, some of the things they've added in are really troubling. And you're still looking at a bill that says that the penalty for breaching these provisions for companies is up to 5% of global revenue. So, and since the last draft of the bill, we've had the dramas play out between X and the E-Safety Commissioner. So we've seen, in the 2023 draft, when we were talking about it, we're like, this is something that could happen, or this is an example of how it could be abused. We've now seen that even without these extra powers, the government and the E-Safety Commission are more than willing to target social media platforms and, bully billionaires like Elon Musk, who are standing up to them and not complying in the background. And we only know they're not complying because they're in court fighting them, and we can only assume that other platforms like Facebook and Instagram and other meta platforms are simply complying and going along with these draconian regimes. So this is really setting up a huge chilling effect. It is really, really concerning.
When you say serious harm, so I'm assuming that it's written in a way that serious harm to specific gender identity groups or whatever it may be, that serious harm is in itself going to be written in a vague way. Like it doesn't mean physical harm. It doesn't mean, what is it, like emotional harm? Is it just if you write a mean comment that can be interpreted as?
And the thing is, when they say serious harm, they're not talking about a threshold of a sliding scale of seriousness where a lesser seriousness of that kind of harm might not be misinformation. No, they are saying that this category of harm altogether is serious harm.
Okay.
So it's not even like serious harm as a threshold compared to less serious harm. It's saying that this whole category of misinformation is capable of causing serious harm. So
Okay.
it's actually setting areas of information that are basically de facto considered to be serious harm if made out. And like we talked about last time, this was even in the 2023 version, to say that the AEC isn't being fair or is unfairly targeting someone is a serious harm. And yet in the Craig Kelly and AEC case in the federal court, the judge found exactly that the AEC had adopted a inexplicable and hostile attitude towards Craig Kelly. So, that's factually what happened, but for Craig Kelly to allege that prior to the case might now also have been considered disinformation.
So last time the ACMA bill, or the previous version of the MAD bill, was being discussed, and they asked for consultation, and there were those 30,000 submissions, and there was a huge uptake of people who wrote in saying this is an abomination, this absolutely should not happen, etc., etc., of which the Libertarian Party was also disseminating a lot of that, a lot of those ideas, and getting their members to put those submissions in. And it didn't ever come to a vote from memory. They never actually tried to pull the trigger on it.
Yep, that's
Do
right.
you think they're going to try to pull the trigger this time?
Well, it's already happening. So that's a really interesting point you pick up. So now this time around, because the last time it was a draft consultation, so the bill hadn't actually entered Parliament. The bill has already passed the lower house. So this bill now is in the Senate. So they are actually trying to pass it. That means that at least when they introduced it, they thought they had the numbers. One of the big things that has happened that is different from then to now is that the Liberals have actually come out and confirmed they will oppose this legislation. Now, when I say this legislation, I'm saying that really carefully in what I say, because they're not saying they've changed their mind about the E-Safety Commission. They're not saying that they're not going to take a policy to combat the threat of misinformation to the next election. They are simply saying that they're going to oppose this bill. And while I welcome, and everyone should welcome, any source of opposition, if Lydia thought in the unlikely event she came out and said she was going to vote against this bill, I'd be gladly accepting her vote, notwithstanding what I think of her. But, you know, for the Liberals to be opposing this is the most opportunistic of opportunism things. It's really pretty, yeah, I don't give them any credit or any points for it. Let's put it that way. And so, but what it means is that now they face a Senate which is very risky, and the passage of the bill can't rely on bipartisan support. Depending on how the Greens come out in respect of it, I've written to their communications shadow portfolio person, Sarah Hanson-Young. I've written to her and urged her to take a pro free speech, pro civil liberties approach to this. They have had a bit of a mixed track record. Sometimes they're okay on free speech, sometimes they're very happy to censor. In the recent laws around child social media restrictions, the recent debate around that, she has called for education as the solution, not government regulation and coercion to prevent kids from accessing social media. So in my letter to her, I basically said, you were absolutely right in that that was the approach to that policy area. I'd encourage you and your parliamentary colleagues to adopt the same approach with this bill. And I also talked about their position on the original e-safety bill as well, where they opposed and really accurately called out all the risks that now have come to pass with that e-safety commission. So they do have form where they are capable of doing the right thing. Unfortunately, it tends to be only when there's a Conservative government in power, or when they're trying to score points and cause the Labor Party pain and annoyance. And that is probably our best shot at getting the Greens to oppose this, is that it will be a real pain point for Labor. And the Greens seem to be keen on making Labor's life as uncomfortable as possible while they're debating housing stuff and a number of other things the Greens are sort of being political terrorists about with Labor. So, so I suppose that's a long way of saying this bill now is in very serious risk. It's going to be very live whether it can get through the Senate. And the other thing it means is that it's been referred on to a committee inquiry in the Senate. So that committee inquiry only had about a week long. It was about 10 days, I think, the period you could actually submit statements or submissions to the inquiry. So there was a much shorter period of time to be able to do that. Even with that shorter period of time, I'm told reliably that there were upwards of 15,000 submissions. So people were able to mobilise very quickly. The Libertarian Party, again, along with other voices, was very quick to point people in that direction. The Free Speech Union in particular, I want to give them a shout out. They've actually developed a tool where it will automate using AI and other scripted abilities. It will generate a submission. I know that's...
I must confess, I did it that way. I couldn't be
Well,
bothered
look,
writing a big whole long thing.
it's the modern age. You know, you might mark your students down at school if they brought you an AI generated submission, but you don't have to adhere to that in public advocacy. And I know that that's effective because I was talking with someone from Senator Payman's office trying to organise to see if I could speak with her. I wasn't successful, but this person basically was ranting in a very upset fashion that I suppose we thought it was very clever to be spamming senators with direct submissions. And I said, look, I didn't cause that. That wasn't, I don't think they believed me. I think they thought it was my doing. And I'm just like, look, I don't know. I'm not responsible for that. But look, obviously it's having the desired effect. So they were like, oh, we've got to put a whole staff member just to answer these vexatious emails. And I was like, oh no.
Oh no, you're gonna have to do some work to earn your taxpayer money that you're stealing.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, the Senate inquiry reports, or is due to report by the 25th, I think, of November, and Parliament finishes for the Christmas break on the 28th of November. So given that there's all these fights that Labor in running engagements with the Greens and the coalition, sort of trying to push their legislative agenda through, and they're really struggling in a lot of places. My hope is that the short time frame between that report being delivered in the Senate and Christmas will mean we get through the Christmas break. Then the earliest they could bring on a vote would be February, and then in March we've got the budget coming through. So I know it sounds like attritional siege warfare, like just don't give an inch and just fight every meter, but that's exactly what it is. It's trench warfare, guerrilla warfare. We're just trying to delay the bill, trying to keep it from being voted on for as long as possible. And then if it gets to a point where it's too close to the election or too close to budget and they want clear air to talk about budget stuff, then maybe it won't be dealt with until after the election. And then hopefully I'll be in the Senate to be able to continue to litigate against it from there. So yeah, we're just buying time for the cavalry to come, basically.
Yeah, well, I think this is a great example of just how everything that's wrong with government and how it works is that even the fact that there's a chance that this bill won't go through is down to political games and political opportunism on both sides. It's not anything that anyone actually believes in. It's just playing these stupid power games to try and get an inch for the next election that they're trying to steal their way into power. So yeah, we
No,
definitely
look,
need some libertarian voices in there. I can.
and that's true, and that's the game that I'm putting my hand up to become immersed in. And the reality is it is like that. It's a swamp. It's people aren't making decisions or pushing agendas for the good of the people. They're not even doing it for the good of their purported values. A lot of the time, they're just making short-term opportunistic decisions. They're reacting. They're trying to. It's a bit Game of Thrones, they're just trying to get an advantage and get ahead. But that's the context that a libertarian senator will be operating within, and I think it's incumbent on me now, as I'm campaigning and if I'm elected, to try to achieve some libertarian outcomes from that process. And that's where I think in the past, you've had Senator Lionhelm on this podcast before. He was an excellent voice for liberty, and he made many people aware of our movement and really put forward some great expressions of libertarian ideology. But there weren't really too many things where he was actually able to sort of thread the needle and try to make some things happen, because I don't think he was really that interested, and I can't blame him, right? It's not something, if you're not a politician, if you're not, raised in politics and have that sort of understanding of how the game works, it can be very uninteresting to you. And so you can focus on doing things that you enjoy and doing things that feel good. But we've got to roll up our sleeves and try to achieve libertarian outcomes, or at the very least delay anti-libertarian outcomes. So I think my real mission and the way I think I will be operating is I'll be weaponizing work rate, I'll be building relationships, and just basically being as much of a pain in the ass as I can in as many offices and ears as I need to. So I think there's the opportunity. You can see, like, David Limbrick does an excellent job of achieving a really outsized outcome for one person, because he is able to build relationships on the crossbench, use those relationships and experience to create voting blocks and to sort of try to make things happen, to like take the lead on issues and try to either shame the government of the day into doing or not doing something, to sort of try to jolt the opposition into action. There's a lot that one person can do. Hopefully I'm joined by one or two other senators from other states, but even if it is just me, I think that there is a huge amount that one person can do.
So to go back to what you were saying a little bit earlier, so the plan, or the optimistic view of how this might play out at the moment is that we might be able to delay this bill until it gets too close to the election, and then after the election it might pop up again. And I do have this feeling, right? So we dealt with it a year ago. There was a huge uproar and there was huge mobilization against the bill, and eventually it got shunned or turned down, or didn't go ahead. And now this time it looks like it'll go ahead. And again, we had to mobilize the troops and get people interested and get people talking about it and get people to even know that they're trying to push this thing through, because I'm sure they'd much rather it go through quietly and away from great public discourse. So is there any hope that, because, even if it does get through this, I'm sure it will come up again in a year, and then if we block it again, it'll come up again in a year, and et cetera, and so on and so forth. The government's not going to stop trying to censor, whether they call it misinformation, disinformation, or it's something else. They're handing power to themselves. So is there any way to stop this thing in perpetuity, or are we just going to have to keep having this battle again and again?
I mean, in a way, the answer to that question is sort of the answer to any freedoms or any values you want to protect. The price of it is eternal vigilance. You've got to accept that you're going to be constantly at war. You know, there's no point at which you can put down your swords and shields and go back to, you know, farming and plowing the land. That's just not the reality. At least some people have to be staying on the wall and keeping watch. And that's uncomfortable. You know, sometimes it's tiring to think that you're consigning yourself to a lifetime or generations of constant battle against it in one form or another. But I think that's like libertarians see that more innately than others. I think most people think, you know, oh, well, if we just get rid of Albo, then this will be fine. This issue will be good. I think more and more people are seeing that really that isn't the case. And I really can see a world where Dutton gets in with a very, very narrow margin and ends up proposing some version of this legislation or a similar sort of misinformation themed or styled bill. And at that point, I'm going to be rolling out the Lord of the Rings memes and, you know, the Isildur Elrond, throw it into the fire, and Peter Dutton saying no. So that is absolutely a campaign commitment. The meme game will be strong. But I think that ultimately these issues and these agendas, the only way to fight them in the long run sustainably is to build our cause and build our movement, both the Libertarian Party and other allied parties, and just slowly but surely take people with us. The other thing that I would say is that in a sense, I think that this legislation and this focus, we talked in one of our previous conversations about globalism and the way that global elites are trying to keep control and trying to corral and manipulate to maintain their influence and their power. I think that one of the reasons they're doing that is because they're losing, right? Like it's one view to say, well, they're winning and they want to keep winning. I don't think that's actually true. I think that the reason these bills are being pushed is because the chain is slipping from their hands. And I think that it will continue to. And I think that the trends enabled by technology, by VPNs, by people like Elon Musk with Starlink and his platform with X, I actually think that rather than saying we can't win and we will eventually lose, it's more true to say that the harder they try to crack down and the more they try to censor, the brighter the light will be and the more we will win. So as much as the first priority should be absolutely preventing these laws from coming into place, if they are eventually passed in one form or another, I just think it'll just even further steal the resolve of people who want to have free speech and alternate voices out there. So
yeah, well, I mean, you can, if we're being glass half full about it, you can look at it and say, hey, this has brought a whole lot of attention to the importance of free speech, and perhaps people who didn't think about it before have now gotten on board and following the movement and bringing people into the movement. So you could look at it that way, even if it does pass.
yeah, and look, I am a naturally optimistic person, and I think also in normal political terms, this would only be an issue as long as the Libs are opposing it. And then if they decide not to oppose it, it just slips off the radar. I think that I'll have the ability to hold whichever party is in government to account and actually just keep the pressure on and keep naming it for what it is and connecting the dots, because a lot of times people don't. And the way it's presented seems like this whole social media restrictions for kids thing was presented as though it was somebody please think of the children and, you know, totally separate to the misinformation stuff and the e-safety commissioner stuff, when in reality, it's obviously completely connected and they're using it as a pretext to bring in broader digital ID and age verification online and to essentially corral and smash resistance like through X and against Elon Musk. Like it's so obviously connected, but they're breathlessly presenting it as a completely different issue in a way that the major parties are either complicit in or are letting people get away with. So I think that's another big thing. We can keep the narrative connected and keep people understanding that it is the same fight. So I think that's another thing we can do.
I did want to talk briefly about some other stuff other than the Mad Bill. So before we move on, was there anything else about the Mad Bill that you think should be mentioned? Something,
Yeah,
anything that we've missed?
no, I think we've pretty much covered it. And yeah, I think that it'll just be really interesting to see where things land. I think my gut feeling is that if it's not in law before Christmas, we'll have one last free Christmas at least, guaranteed, without misinformation and censorship. I
So
think that
write
if
everything that you can think of on your Facebook post or your Twitter post or everything. Write
yeah,
as
just go
much as
buck
you can, as
wild.
quickly
Yeah,
as you can.
2024 is your chance to say it, whatever you've been wanting to say. So, but yeah, I think that if we can push it past Christmas, I feel like it won't be law before the next federal election. So,
Okay, well that's the aim then. That's some relatively good news. What I did want to talk about just briefly, I think a little bit of a lighter topic for us libertarians, certainly not for the Liberal Party. Here in Victoria recently, there has been a bit of hubbub around about the conflict between Moira Deeming and John Pesutto and their clash within the Liberal Party. I know you, I mean, the most embarrassing thing about your past is not your criminal record, but the fact that you were a member of the Liberal Party. So you do know how they operate and have some, I guess, some contacts still within their people that you still keep in touch with. So what's the situation there for those who haven't really followed, and what's going on?
so I think that if you have been following the more redeeming court proceedings, I think that so the court proceedings have been more public and more visible than ever before because they have been live streamed. So the court has been essentially sitting in open court with YouTube streaming. Those aren't recorded streams in the same way that you couldn't record a court proceeding if you were there in person. So it's been more accessible. I think more people have read about the case than have actually watched the case. But at work at the law firm, we have sort of had it running in the background, my boss and I separately in each office while we've been doing work. And so I have basically been watching it and paying attention to each of the witnesses and the cross-examination and all that sort of thing. And in particular, I was really paying a lot of attention to Pesutto's time on the stand because I think his answers and the narrative, often his answers really weren't answering the question at all, much to the barrister and the judge's frustration at times. He was so sort of determined to be on message that it really was obvious in many respects he wasn't answering the question. But what he did say was, I think, very revealing, not so much about the case, but about where he thinks the Liberal Party in Victoria should be and what he thinks the keys to actually winning. He would say success. I would say winning government. And I think they're different things for Victoria and for the Liberal Party because I've lived through and supported the Liberal Party through a terrible state government, the Bailey-Napthine government, which was fundamentally no different to the Labor government that preceded it or followed it. It wasn't even a punctuation note in what would otherwise be a continuous Labor reign. So the 4 years of Liberal government were so ineffective and weak that they fought the 2014 election on jobs and growth and unsurprisingly lost to the Labor Party. So it was a choice between Diet Coke or Coke, and people go, well, why would you have Diet Coke? And it seems that John Pesutto is again determined to be the Diet Coke of Victorian politics because what he said time and again in both in the meeting that was hilariously recorded without their knowledge by their own MP. So David Southwick isn't someone you'd want to have a confidential meeting with. Let's put it that way. That shouldn't be defamatory. And basically, so there was this recording played of the meeting itself. And in the meeting, Pesutto was saying, we want to be modern, we want to be mainstream. And those two M words should send chills down the spine of any card-carrying Liberal Party member who cares about the values of Menzies and who cares about either conservative or libertarian values, to be frank. I think wherever you sit within the Liberal Party, if you are a conservative, if you are a libertarian or a classical liberal, either of those camps should be horrified by the vision for, or lack of vision for, the Liberal Party that John Pesutto holds going forward. So basically that catch cry of modern and mainstream, I think what that means is appeasing, ineffectual, and trying to be everything to everyone and just trying to please or rather not offend 51% of the Victorian population after preferences. And I think what that effectively means is that there is this really vocal minority of activist groups in Victoria that John Pesutto will be trying not to offend, but they're the group that are never going to vote for them. The Liberals will never, that like, let's put it this way. John Pesutto is like the Malcolm Turnbull of state politics. He's the Liberal leader that the Labor Party and the Greens would accept if there have to be a Liberal Party. If there has to be a Liberal Party, and if one day they might form government, you want the person who is the least offensive to your values as possible and who's going to achieve the least change or claw back against the swing towards socialism. Um, so yeah, look, I'm aware I've just sort of made some pretty big swings there. So you know, sorry if any of the people I'm still friends with who are in the Liberal Party are watching this, but yeah, be
But
better.
there's always room in the Libertarian Party. So, I mean,
There is.
drop what
There
you're
is.
doing and
And
join the good guys.
more than that, I think there's the opportunity to, if you're concerned that the Labor Party might win back government or might retain government federally, you want Peter Dutton to form government and become the Prime Minister. But you also are very concerned about the direction of the Liberal Party when it comes to free speech, when it comes to living according to their values and governing according to their values. I think it is a very, very good option to consider voting one for the Liberals in the lower house and voting one for Libertarians in the Senate. Because if you are the sort of Liberal Party member or supporter who likes the Jared Rennicks, the Matt Canavans, the Alex Antishes of the Liberal Party Senate, none of those senators are from Victoria. You are not going to get a senator like that from Victoria that's going to come up through the ranks of the Victorian Liberal Party. So, you need to find someone who's going to be a champion for smaller government and classical liberal values in our party in the Senate.
Fantastic. Where can people find you, Jordan? Have you got anything coming up that people can find you at? I know you've done a couple of rallies recently. Are there any on the books for the next few weeks already, or just keep following your socials?
Yeah, so following my socials, so it's at Jordan Dittloff Libertarian on Insta and Facebook, and at Dittloff with the number 4 Senate on X, formerly Twitter. So those are the main sort of ways you can keep up to date with what's going on in the campaign. If you'd like to know more about me as a background thing, or follow some of the media appearances and podcasts, including these ones that I've done, my website is www.jordandittloff.com.au. And so that we don't have any more rallies planned at the moment coming up, but what we are planning, which is really exciting, is we're going to be starting to announce and launch lower House of Reps campaigns here in Victoria, which I'm really excited about, both for the party and the grassroots movement we're building, and for the community and getting to engage and really generating that momentum and generating that presence in the community. We've got some absolutely awesome House of Reps candidates, a number of whom are very young and that next generation of leadership within the party, but also the generation that's the most affected by the way that the uni party is governing our country. So we've got candidates who are going to be the ones that pay for the mistakes and consequences of the way things are currently heading. So that's really exciting. We will be having a pretty big Christmas gathering, I think. Closer towards Christmas, we'll be circulating information about that. But yeah, there might also, between now and Christmas, I can't give too much away, but there might be a couple of interesting stunts, some sort of interesting opportunities to showcase some policy, especially around tax and excise. So watch this space.
Oh, so you don't give away your spoilers, you only give away my spoilers. I see how it is. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Jordan. It's been a pleasure. And well, as usual, you've been a wealth of knowledge and information. I will put all the links and stuff to how people can follow you directly on socials, and the Libertarian Party and all the rest of it, as well as all of ours. We can be found on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and Twitter.
And hopefully the next time I come on the podcast, it will be with the further final form of Senator.
Yes, we need one more evolution.
Yes,
and
that's
then
right.
and then we're there. All right. Thank you very much for watching. We will catch you next time.
Thanks, mate.